Yeah, it was a giant table of hundreds of bags of Chick-fil-A sandwiches. And then a table full of Krispy Kreme donuts. What would you like to talk about?
Well, okay, so there was a number of things.
Prog as a genre was something that I was totally oblivious of up to the internet. And even a few years past it. I think the first time I remember actually being online was probably like 1994. I had a roommate that worked at a computer store, so he had the whole setup,
Right.
And I just remember going, hey, can you see if Yes has a website? And then, we went. And it's like, yeah, this looks really good. Somebody put a lot of work into this. So even back then, they were kind of on top of that. And after a while, they started having concert reviews on it, and you could kind of peek and see what the set list. And I always kind of liked it.
Right.
It doesn't really spoil it for me. It's more like when I go to see a live band like that I love, as much as I love them, I don't want to see the same set every time I go.
Right.
And it's seeing songs I've never seen live before that keeps me coming back. And once they settle into this kind of greatest hits mode, I don't really want to go.
Right.
So, and at this point, I've probably seen most of the Yes music I would want to see. But back in the early 90s, they hadn't got back to any of their proggy stuff.
Right.
Or at least they were just getting around to it at the time. So it was nice to just kind of take a peek on there. So that was like 1994-ish, something like that. I don't think I had a computer at home until 1999.
Okay.
And I originally got on something... these Usenet news groups,
Oh, yes.
which are kind of a wild west of the internet. You have, awful spammers right next to wonderful trolls.
Oh, man.
And other people, And I, at the time I found a group for Yes. And I arrive, and it's kind of like, oh, my people, hey, how are you? And it's kind of like, shut up. What lineup do you like? You like them all? You're weak.
Yeah.
You better pick one and fight to it. But you better pick one and fight to the death.
Right.
And this whole mentality caught me by surprise. It was like, this is not good.
Yeah.
Maybe I should find a place that doesn't put up with this kind of behavior.
Right.
And out of that, I created Progressive Ears. There were factions,
Yeah.
and they sprung up. Because originally I was just talking about Yes and all, and I had one guy who called himself Supper's Ready 101. And Supper's Ready was kind of I don't want to say a troll, but he was an instigator. But he, at the end of the day, had the right idea, because it's like, you can't just keep talking about the same 5 bands. And it's
Right.
like, okay, well, what do you got? And he listed all this stuff that we'd never heard of before. And I realized that for Progressive Ears to grow and continue to be worth something, we needed to talk about all this stuff.
Yeah.
But then I discovered that not all the fans get along. Like, there's almost like the people that like the more commercial stuff don't want a bunch of atonal wild stuff. And meanwhile, the other people that like the atonal stuff, we're talking our Henry Cows and things in that ballpark. Yes is lightweight stuff.
Right.
Genesis, I was 50. That's teenager stuff, which is kind of a snotty way to go about it. But I get it. Because I think with progressive rock, I also ran into people that acted like their record collection made them somehow a highly evolved being that could look down upon other people that were lesser in their eyes because of their record collection.
Yeah, the Jack Black from High Fidelity situation.
Exactly.
It's the new Belle and Sebastian.
It's the record we've been listening to and enjoying, Barry.
Well, that's unfortunate because it sucks ass.
Tried to really shoot a hole in that.
Yeah.
It's just like, no. But you can't really. I mean, people are going to be the way they are.
Sure.
And the idea is just to, okay, well, let's just all play together and get along anyway. Like, I remember My girlfriend, when I was like 14, she had an older brother that played bass in a band.
Okay.
And so they seemed so cool, it's like something to aspire to. And we'd hang out over at his place, and I was digging through his records, and I ran across the Yes albums. And I thought, what catches me a lot of times is like a logo that kind of ties the whole discography together.
Sure, yeah.
Or artwork, thematic kind of stuff from one album to the next. It's almost like you could kind of, without even listening to it, you could just kind of sort them together.
Right.
It's like, wow, this really looks interesting. So I put on Fragile and hear those harmonics and that backwards piano notes welling
Right.
up. And it's like, oh, I've heard this. I heard this probably when I was like 5 and didn't even realize what it was.
Right.
So that was Yes. Cool.
Yeah.
And then Close to the Edge, I just thought, wow, just the name alone was kind of captivating. And then I put it on, and the first 3 minutes is like the most wacky atonal stuff I'd heard up to that point.
Oh, yeah.
I was only 14. And it really excited me. It was like, wow, this is really something. I've got to have more of this.
There'll be something that I discover that at the time, oh my gosh, I can't listen to this. This is terrible. And then now it's one of my favorite things. So, for example, I used to work for Dr. Donald F. Ungerite, who was the head of the film department at Florida State University. And he had this gigantic, eclectic collection of media in his office that I was free to borrow from whenever I wanted. So whether it be movies or music. And one of the things he had in there was Song X by Pat Metheny and Ornette Coleman. And at the time I was like, this is, there's nothing, I can't latch to this in any way. It's just, they're screaming at me and I don't, but now it's one of my favorite albums. So is there anything that you came across younger that you have since come back and said, man, I really have done a 180 on that?
Well, maybe not something that I discovered when I was a kid, or if I did, it bounced off me and I didn't realize what I was hearing.
Right.
But just once I got into the prog genre and started digging around, I found that some of the more pungent strains were a little off-putting at first listen, but I almost felt like it was a nut I had to crack. So I would keep going back until it didn't strike me that way.
Right.
Almost like there's something good to be had by growing to know this music.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the time through repetition. And I'm like that with a lot of records. It's like, didn't like it on the first listen. Well, fine. I'm just going to force myself to listen to it 10 times and then we'll see what sticks.
Exactly. That's the whole point of this series. Yeah, exactly.
For instance, the band Chicago.
Yeah.
My older brother brought home the first 2 albums. I remember some of my earliest memories are listening to his record collection in 1968, 69, when all this stuff was new. So the first 2 Chicago albums, there was just something about these horn records, and also the Blood, Sweat, and Tears album, the one with the kind of burgundy fade of the black and white picture
Right.
of the whole band on the cover with spinning wheel. There was something about those horn albums that just immediately appealed to me. I just absolutely love them. And I still do to this day. And it's a real treat to play with the band with the horn section. Once in a blue moon, I get to do that, especially when we do the Steely Dan nights.
Yeah.
So I love that. That's a lot of fun. So Chicago is a good example. Like maybe 15 years ago, I thought, well, I know 1 and 2, but what about the rest of them? There's like 30 of them.
Yeah.
Let's go find out what these are all about. So I went and bought the 3rd one. I was like, wow, that's really good too. And well, I discovered what I liked best.
Yeah.
Like for me, the Terry Kath era is
Yes.
the best. But even within that, I feel like they kind of peaked around the 5th. And then the 7th is kind of like a last minute rally to go back to their jazzy roots. And then after that, it's kind of like...
So when you and I first went through the 26 albums that we're going to be doing for this series, there was only one that you kind of brought that said, this is a must, and if you don't have it, then you should include this, and that's Camel, and we're going to be getting to that soon.
It was. Yeah, Moon Madness.
But were there any by the artists that we've dealt with so far that were not in the collection that you wish were?
It's funny, but this week I've been thinking, I wish we could go back through everything and see what cool stuff we missed that we maybe should have had in there in the first place.
Right.
Although, that would take another season. So, and I imagine you may have a different slant for next year.
Well,
Usually it's a little
spoiler
different.
alert, next season I think is going to be an all request season.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think next season there've been so many people that come to me and say, "Why don't you do this one?" So I'm gonna poll the people who have come to me with suggestions and get them to request, and then maybe have a few people just randomly online.
That sounds good.
So
Well,
yeah,
I might toss a couple
for sure,
your way
yes.
because I can think of a few others that I wish we would have done, but we haven't got to yet.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, and I've really enjoyed just watching your reactions to these. I mean, to be able to just kind of pull something out of a pile and have it really impact you in such a good way.
Oh, yeah. There have been a couple like
the
that.
Rotters Club is a great
Yes.
example, or the Hillage. I can tell you really love that
for sure.
That's great. That's kind of the fun of having a record collection and sharing with a friend.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you're a progressive rock fan, it feels kind of like you're beating your head against the wall. It's like, all your friends are aware you like it, but, either you're into it or you're not. And, so to have something that really touches you and share it with somebody and have them be equally emotionally moved by it is a nice feeling, because that doesn't happen a whole lot. Yes, broke up in '82, and Chris Squire and Alan White I don't remember who it was, Phil Carson or one of these guys, some big record label executive said, you really ought to hook up with a new guitar player. This Trevor Rabin guy, you might want to try. And Chris had heard him a few years earlier. When he heard Trevor's album, thought it was the new Foreigner album. And so they wound up hooking up, and they got together and had a really bad drunken jam the first time they got together, but they realized they liked each other and had chemistry, so they pursued it and put together a new band. It was called Cinema.
Okay.
And Trevor and Chris Squire were going to be the singers. And for a hot minute, they tried to get Trevor Horn to sing, and he had just come off, replacing John Anderson during the drama era with mixed results.
Right.
So he was like, I'm not interested in ever fronting a rock band again, but I'll produce your record.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the two Trevors did not get along well. Like, there's stories of fighting over the snare sound on Over a Lonely Heart, Like, Horn was very into the Police at the time. He's like, let's tune it up to A and, get that Stuart Copeland sound.
Oh, yeah.
Meanwhile, Rabin wanted this huge arena rock reverby sound, and they fought about it. And eventually Horn won, and he said he came out of the studio one day and one of the roadies was like, sounds like a fucking pea bouncing on a barrel. But it is what it is. But so anyway, the record company eventually came and said, you'd have a built-in audience if you just called this Yes. And get John Anderson to come sing on it. And out of that wound up being their biggest success ever.
I saw a documentary recently about the Fairlight.
Very cool.
And that famous orchestra hit was actually just a sample from the opening chord to Stravinsky's final movement of the Firebird Suite.
Are you familiar with the group Sparks?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I got into that's another group where I knew nothing about them, and then I saw their documentary.
Yeah.
And it was like, ooh, another band that has 25 albums for me to find out.
Yeah,
Let's go check this out. And I'm so glad that documentary got made.
Yeah.
Because it really shined a light on them and showed that they had created like synth pop like 5 years early. That album they did with Giorgio Moroder in like 1978 is nothing but synth-driven deliciousness, and 5 years later everybody was sounding like that.
Right.
They kind of invented, I don't say invented, but they kind of did the punk thing a few years before that was big as well. They have a song on their most recent album. It's called Stravinsky's Only Hit.
Oh.
And it's all about that.
That's nice.
I think it's awesome. Yeah.